Right. Bengals, they were up at number 6. The draft started going in their favor early on. A lot of offensive players were coming off the board left and right. Certain position groups were dropping. It was really starting to line up for the Bengals to be able to have a pick of the litter as far as any of the top prospects that they wanted. Obviously, they go in the route of taking Shemar Stewart with the number 17 pick. I remember us talking about him. I remember Jacob was adamant that was one guy that he was really hesitant on them taking, and they fell for, of course, the fact that, hey, it's basically Myles Garrett without the production, hoping that the production, of course, comes. But he checks off every box when it comes to the measurables, checks off every box when it comes to the physique and the look. I mean, he walks into a room, he's physically imposing, but then you look at his stats, you look at his numbers, there's nothing physically imposing about that whatsoever. A very polarizing pick. I don't want to say controversial because obviously I think that we need to kind of get to the season and see what exactly he can do. But I do find it very interesting that the Bengals continue to take risks with these picks when you need to be a little bit safer, in my opinion, just because I get that they weren't as aggressive as we thought they would be in free agency because of all the activity, of course, with keeping Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Obviously taking care of Burrow the season before, whatever it was, but they're getting everyone paid and taken care of. They weren't as aggressive in free agency as you want, but with having so many dollars tied up to one side of the ball, obviously not wanting to marry Trey Hendrickson long-term, the draft has to be their best friend. The draft has been the Chiefs' best friend. The draft has been the Eagles' best friend. When you look at the Super Bowl contenders around the league, it's not just because they have a great quarterback. If it's just about the quarterback, the Bengals are winning a Super Bowl the last couple of years. It's not just about the quarterback as much as we want to make it out to be. The biggest puzzle piece is getting the quarterback right, but you have to be able to hit in the draft. And that's something that the Bengals just haven't been able to do consistently enough. So with the team that has struggled in recent drafts especially, you start to look at some of the higher draft picks that they've had as of late, taking a little bit of risk. You think of Amarius Mims last year. Now, Mims has been solid, but the big knock on him was obviously, he didn't play a ton of games. What exactly are you getting with them? But he checked off all the measurables, of course, so that's one reason why they felt so confident in going in that direction. You ignored the red flags. You were aggressive with Jermaine Burton, but you took a risk with Jermaine Burton. You ignored the red flags. That came back and cost you last year. Possibly cost you moving forward because he was supposed to be a potential option that if he hit, maybe the Bengals don't sign T. Higgins. Maybe they use that $30 million and they distribute it into other key position groups. Burton, I think, is one reason why the Bengals ended up doing that. I think Joe Burrow really wanted T, no doubt about it. He made it clear. I think the Bengals had to do it because they had no other option because Burton completely fell flat and the red flags ended up costing them. You think of Eric All last year. The big red flag on him was injury history. And sure enough, not only did he miss the majority of last season, he's pretty much out for this season coming up. And then you take a guy with more, I hate to call him red flags, but question mark. He checks off every box. All the measurables are there, talking, of course, about Stewart. But there's no production there. I get why, and Jake, this is what I want to ask you, because you've talked, of course, about the fact that this team, you want the Bengals to continue to be aggressive. But at what point, how aggressive, is this aggressive or is this too big of a risk? At what point, where is that line for the Bengals, who you want them to be aggressive, but you don't want them to be reckless? Was this a reckless decision for a team that desperately needs to hit in this draft?
I think it certainly could be. And we talked about it a little bit before the show, and I think there's really two options for Shemar Stewart and how his career in Cincinnati plays out. I don't see any way that he turns into Sam Hubbard or Joseph Osai or, one of these guys where their contract runs up after their rookie year and we're like, well, he's a pretty good player. Are we going to pick up that fifth-year option? I don't know. Shemar Stewart, we're either going to be sitting here in 2-3 years saying, how the hell did he make it to 17? Or the people that are upset last night are going to be doing the best victory lap of all time. Those are the two options. Either he's the 4.5 sack guy from Texas A&M that can't finish at the quarterback, or he's going to live up to the 10.0 RAS score and one of the most, freak athletes we've ever seen at the Combine. I think those are the two options. He's not just going to scratch success in the NFL. He's either going to be an unmitigated bust or in contention for Defensive Player of the Year type stuff. And I think that's a tough place for Bengals fans to be because of the lack of faith that we have in this coaching staff to develop players. And I think a big thing Bengals fans are holding on to now is Lou Anarumo was defensive coordinator of this team for the second longest tenure of any defensive coordinator in the history of this franchise behind Dick LeBeau. So we're used to him running this organization and how everything goes. We brought in Al Golden, and one of the main reasons was how he's going to handle young talent, how he's going to develop these guys. If he's able to make Shemar Stewart work, then it's certainly the highest ceiling of anyone at a position of need there at 17. It's a no-brainer pick if you can make him work. And if you think Al Golden can make Shemar Stewart work, a player with a very similar draft profile, which a lot of Bengals fans have been saying as a negative, but Miles Murphy. If he can make both of those guys work, how much better is this Bengals defensive line than what we're talking about going into next season? It certainly makes Trey Hendrickson more expendable. So I'm going to, reserve my negativity. I tried to stay as positive as I could last night. I stayed up pretty late watching highlights. The frustration of this pick is, when you make a pick of a guy in a draft that you're not, thrilled about, what does every fan usually do? You run to YouTube, look up the highlights. Shemar Stewart has 4.5 sacks. I saw him all in about 5 minutes. But he led Texas A&M in pressures last year, and I know that's not sacks. That's not bringing the quarterback down. That does mean something. It also means something that Walter Nolan transferred from Texas A&M to Ole Miss, had a way more productive season. Nick Scorton transferred from Purdue after being first-team All-Big Ten to Texas A&M, had his least productive season of his NFL or of his collegiate career before going to the draft this year. So Texas A&M's defense could potentially be at fault here for his lack of production with getting close to the quarterback in a lot of those slots. It's frustrating because guys like James Pierce, Mike Green were on the board. But those guys have character concerns. And what was the big thing that we said about those character concerns? You only take that player if the meetings go and you feel comfortable with them. If they met with James Pierce and Mike Green and didn't feel comfortable about those character concerns, I don't want to take him over Shemar Stewart just because they had better production. If you don't think those two guys can stay on the field, then certainly take Shemar Stewart and roll the dice. The frustration really comes from the board laying how a lot of Bengals fans prayed it was going to lay, and then going in a direction that no one wanted them to go. I think that's where a lot of frustration goes. I think a lot of the edge rushers in this class are going to be great. If Shemar Stewart lives up to his potential, he'll be the best or the second best one behind Abdul Carter.
Who would you have sorry, Elliot, real quick. Who would you have because the guy Nolan came off the board the pick before. If Nolan's available, they're 95% sure that's where they're going, right?
So almost 100%.
Nolan's off the board. You're not a big fan of the pick. You're willing to give it a shot, obviously, but who is it that, damn it, they picked him. I wish they would have gone this route. Who is that name that you would have rather them taken with Nolan off the board then?
I'm going to reserve my official answer until week 1 because if
Week
Jahad,
one?
if Jahad Campbell has a helmet and shoulder pads on week 1, that
enough.
should have been the pick.
Okay.
If he's not healthy for week 1, like a lot of people suggest, then the Bengals really can't take him. The Eagles have that luxury by having that many stars on their defense. But if he plays week 1, I'm going to be very frustrated with passing on him because that's the only reason I could think that he's not a perfect fit at 17 for the Bengals.
Well, are you concerned at least a little bit that after the pick it was, quote, I never talked to the Bengals, I didn't talk to them, doesn't remember any communication with the Bengals. So this seems to be a shock to him. It's a shock to the fan base, even though I think there were some people like Jacob who called it a month ago that if he was available,
It's a very Bengals pick.
It's a Bengals pick, but are you? I mean, how much more concerned are you that it seems like it almost seems like the Bengals weren't even interested?
Yeah.
Based on the lack of communication with this guy.
Officially, no top 30 meeting. He said he doesn't remember if they met at the combine. So fingers crossed that they didn't, and it wasn't just the most unmemorable meeting that he's ever had. Yeah, he was shocked, and I think most of us were as well. The Bengals have lived in those meetings for the last 4 or 5 years, especially during the Zach Taylor tenure. They live with 5-star prospects from Power 5 schools, and they live with those top 30 meetings. This is certainly a big shock. I think that's why he fell down a lot of our projections for the Bengals as we got closer to the draft, because he didn't have that meeting. Obviously, they didn't value that. Maybe they spent that time on some of those guys that had more of the off-the-field concerns. If they felt comfortable with Shemar Stewart, this is what I keep coming back to. If they felt comfortable with Shemar Stewart, then it's the right pick. The reason why we're all so against it is because we're uncomfortable with him. And if they take him at 17 without meeting with him, they have to think he's all but a sure thing. So, yes, that's a negative in terms of if it doesn't work, that's going to be very easy to look back on and say, stupid Bengals front office. If it does work, maybe they didn't waste their time with a guy that they were so sure on.
Some of the stats from Goodberry. Goodberry tweeted this out yesterday. I thought this was interesting. Shemar Stewart missed 26.9% of his tackles in college. His missed tackle rate is lower than 98.5% of all defensive end prospects we've charted. His tackle for loss rate is in the 13th percentile. His run stop rate in the bottom 1 percentile. His PFF run defense grade puts him at the 45th percentile. My issue with this pick is that it feels like we're taking gambles.
Oh yeah.
We got set answers out there. We've got the answer to the test, and the Bengals are closing their eyes and throwing darts. We have an uncertain situation with Trey Hendrickson. Nobody knows if Trey Hendrickson's going to suit up for the Bengals week 1. Nobody knows, even if he suits up for the Bengals week 1, is he going to have the positive attitude or the want to perform for the Bengals now that all of this has happened this offseason? There's a lot of uncertainty there. So my question for the Bengals would be, why would you match uncertainty with uncertainty? That's the part I don't get. Because there were set answers there. Excuse me. There were set answers on the board that were taken immediately after, where it's like, why didn't you take him? Why didn't we go James Pierce? Why didn't we go all these guys? And maybe some of it's character concerns. Maybe some of it's, you saw the Jermaine Burton situation last year, and they said, you know what? Anybody with a character concern, we're out. No matter what. No matter how little, no matter how inconvenient it might be for us when this pick comes around. If I heard anything bad about him at all, if somebody had a bad tweet about him one time, we're not drafting him. If that's the case, and maybe that maybe they're right for it, because I think that we had discourse on this show where it's, should you take that? Should you take that risk? It's been Jacob's opinion. I think I tend to agree with him that the character concerns, unfortunately, though might be morally not the best, you're drafting him to play football for your team. So you're drafting a talent. And that's what I think it outweighs anything else. So if this was a character concern pick, where it's like the Bengals are afraid to take anybody else who's done something possibly wrong, or could do something wrong, or maybe will be a problem in the locker room, then that's one thing. But it feels to me like this was just like they were trying to go safe with it. And by going with a safe pick, by going with the most athletic guy in the draft, you took the biggest gamble of them all. Yeah. And that's the part that confuses me. I don't get it.
This pick feels a lot like, looking at the draft board and how it played out last night in real time even, it feels a lot like Billy Price. And I'm not saying Shemar Stewart's going to turn into Billy Price, but I'm talking about how we ended up there.
Yeah.
And it's the guy that everyone mocked to Cincinnati, the guy that was the perfect fit to Cincinnati going right before that. And obviously then it was Frank Ragnow, the center that's been the Lions center for going on a decade now, an all-pro guy every single year. No doubt about it, probably going to be in Canton one day. And this year, we don't know what he's going to become, but certainly Walter Nolan was that guy in this draft class, the perfect pick, the ideal pick for the Cincinnati Bengals. And he goes one pick before at 16 to the Cardinals. If the Bengals didn't have James Pierce or Mike Green on their draft board, I'm not so confident I disagree with this pick. I think you can certainly make an argument for Shemar Stewart over Derek Harmon. Derek Harmon had 1 year of production on the interior for Oregon. He's not the best pass rusher. So are you really drafting another guy that you're hoping to develop as a pass rusher who's a stout run defender in the middle? You have Chris Jenkins, who I believe in. You have McKinley Jackson, who they believe in. Maybe that works. I've seen a lot of people talking about the DB room. I wouldn't have went with Malachi Starks or Nicky Manwari there. Obviously, Manwari fell out of the first round. Starks goes to the Ravens, so I'm sure he'll be an all-pro caliber player, but I'm not sure that's the direction I would have went with the Cincinnati Bengals, especially with the depth at defensive back in this class. So with the players that went after the Bengals and the players on the board, are there frustrations? Sure, but there's a lot of question marks about the guys that are those quote-unquote sure things. And those question marks don't relate to them as football players, which make it very, very frustrating and sometimes confusing to debate, because Shemar Stewart's questions all come on the field, which is a tough pill to swallow sometimes. But he's still a freak. And if you go watch his tape, we shared some of it last night on Chatterbox Bengals, he wreaks havoc on offenses. He's in the backfield all the time. He's getting around blockers. He's just not finishing at the quarterback. And if you're able to teach that, maybe you have a really, really dominant edge rusher in the middle of the first round.
Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Rearing. I want to pick up with more reaction to, of course, the Bengals' number 17 selection last night. Of course, going with Shemar Stewart. Checks off every box from, again, all the measurables, everything else. But it all just comes down to production, and not just his production in college, but what will his production be with the Bengals? That's the big question mark at this point.